again, you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
What a stupid son of a bitch.
Eric Parker here. I'm your candidate for Jacksonville City Council at-large Group 1. I just wanted to remind you about our event we have coming up on February 25th from 6 to 9 p.m. We'll be here at Veterans United Craft Brewery, and we'll be discussing liberty. So if you're passionate about liberty movement and local craft beer, come out and spend time with us. We have 3 amazing local Jacksonville Libertarian candidates, along with Larry Sharp and Chase Oliver.
Good morning, folks. Thank you for tuning in. This is another episode of Friendly Fire, where I bring on candidates or recently previous candidates, and we talk about a retrospective. So either I will interview them and give them tough questions, or we'll bring them in and have a conversation about their most recent run for office, give a retrospective, talk about things that hopefully will get people excited about getting involved in future campaigns, and maybe even get some people excited about running for office as well. This morning, we're having a little bit of a challenge. My guest is running a little bit behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the show just for a little bit. And actually, I take it back. It looks like he is here, back screen or backstage, not back screen. That's the back screen. He's backstage. So looks like we can continue the show as normal. So today I'm bringing on Hector Roos, who ran for the Libertarian Party, ran for governor for the Libertarian Party back in 2022. He joins me today so that we can have a retrospective about that campaign. This is not the time now, of course, for all the tough questions. This is now just to try to say, hey, what kind of things went well? What kind of things, maybe not so well? What would you do in the future? So on and so forth. So let's go ahead and bring Hector in, and then stay tuned. In a little bit, we will have that bill review. So here we go. Hector, how are you?
Hey, DL. Good morning.
Morning to you, sir. You made it. I was getting worried. I was like, I'm gonna have to figure something out. It's 7:30. It's just too early in the morning to try to figure something out.
You know, the houses are not usually quiet at that hour anyway.
Right.
But that's the point, right? It's not that quiet.
Right. So how have you been since your run?
Good. Just hit the ground running. Things haven't slowed down for me.
Okay.
Obviously there was a lawsuit I had to contend with. There was I was elected the chair of the Libertarian Party of Miami-Dade County. And of course, my duties didn't end with the state party either. So a lot of things cooking with the party itself. Of course, that doesn't stop my, I actually have to work for a living and do more of that on that end, of course, to catch up with when you run for office. It's disruptive to life and business.
Right. So what's going on with that? Can you talk about it, or is this the lawsuit?
Okay, so what we ended so
let's back up and tell people what the lawsuit was for anybody that may be tuning in who's not familiar.
Sure. So during the campaign, one of the and even to this day, it's been I guess several lawsuits later, it's been found out that the office of the governor has actually kind of been split into two, where you have one group of people who are in charge of handling the day-to-day business of the government, and then you have another group whose sole purpose for existence is to spin off as many crazy publicity stunts as possible. And one of those publicity stunts that happened in September was the DeSantis administration basically created a program out of thin air and tried to tie it to an existing law and tried to use money, in fact, from existing appropriations for a program totally based in Texas, which was involved finding so-called immigrants or illegal immigrants for under their scheme to hop on a plane and get delivered to some liberal bastion. In this case, was Martha's Vineyard was the recipient of a 2 plane loads of only Venezuelan immigrants and families who were basically stuck in El Paso, Texas, waiting for an asylum hearing. And this is a bit more expansive. If anybody's been paying attention in Florida, we have and if you're particularly for a first generation immigrant family background like myself, you notice that there's been this uptick in terms of people fleeing from Cuba, Venezuela, and other countries in the hemisphere, trying to get into the United States because of how bad the conditions are in their own home countries, and really, and would it be a surprise to say that America's foreign policy, if contributed to that suffering and misery, if not wholly was responsible for it? So lo and behold, what we have now is, so getting back to the publicity stunt. So they at this time, the DeSantis administration spent almost $2 million on this program, has faced multiple lawsuits. My lawsuit was the first one, essentially just challenging his authority. Where do you have this authority to just create this program out thin air and appropriate these funds that were not designed for you to go to Texas, recruit people in really what's underhanded means, right? It wasn't just my argument was really a rule of law. And of course, I'm making, and of course, my other point is, as I was running for governor at the time, was also to point out in the libertarian perspective on immigration, which is, yes, I agree that Florida should take a very active role in its own immigration policy. I was quoting the former Supreme Court justice who basically said a state cannot have its sovereignty if it can't dictate who's in its territory. So the point is that states have a very active role in establishing immigration, and historically, United States immigration policy, and that is to say, entrance and exits were actually all were managed by states. They were never managed by the federal government. And the Ellis Island program was basically was the progressive era big government version of usurping states' rights in that area and co-opting what states already had, particularly New York State at the time, already had in place, and that was run by mutual aid organizations and in combination with the state government. So this what we have now, of course, is the progressive era introduced big government into the equation. Basically, immigration was the deciding issue historically for what fueled the rise and growth and expansion of government in the 20th century. And this is so important, really, that I had to enter a lawsuit because it made a great point about immigration policy. But then on the humanitarian side, we also found out that that group of migrants or immigrants from Venezuela were basically told, "We have money and jobs for you, waiting for you in Boston," and then so they were a lot of them agreed with their children to go get on these planes in the middle of the night. And be flown to Boston, and they wake up. Well, not wake up, but the planes land. They're told okay, we're here. They all exit, and it's a little quiet little town, an island. They don't even know where they are actually, and they're told, here's a pamphlet. Go walk 8 blocks, and there's this building. It's not open yet, but it will be open soon because in the middle of the night, and they'll give you the help that we told you you're going to get. You're going to get. So of course they're. This is about 49 to 50 immigrants from Venezuela, and under protection from U.S. law, actually. So they weren't even here illegally. They were just people who were desperate, and they accepted they accepted the offer. So it's not the first kind of series of publicity stunts we've seen, and I really mean publicity stunts because ultimately, it's basically a political office within the governor's office to create as much sensationalism around the governor, and they even involved military contractors, frankly, that were to run the program itself. So it all had to be exposed out. My lawsuit was the first one out, and it was important to be just somebody do it, and then subsequently there's like 3 or 4. There's actually now 4 or 5 others. Some of them on the civil rights issues because there's smart attorneys got with the immigrant groups. immigrants themselves, from Venezuela, and said, well, this situation looks like, if you guys were defrauded to get on these planes, then that's a form of kidnapping, right? So there's a civil action there. There's some lawmakers in the state of Florida that are actually pursuing that the whole scheme wasn't constitutional. That's being played out. There's public records lawsuits in relation to this as well. And my whole point of it was that actually it took Democrats, or even anybody really, another week or two in some cases, to file the quick actions that I just did in days. And the point I'm trying to make is that Libertarians are the actual opposition party in Florida. Democrats have essentially voted, in fact, passed this type of program, not the exact program, of course, because he's working with authorization, but really an immigrant relocation program and what I call rendition, because they're targeting people who are suspected criminals into foreign territory. Anything outside the state of Florida being foreign. And my point is that Democrats have surrendered to Republicans in the sense that we'll go along with whatever you want. Frankly, we don't disagree with you that much in what you're offering. And that's really the point of why we even needed a governor candidate, because there was no, Charlie Crist was not the opposition candidate for a Republican, Ron DeSantis. You're basically just offering his literal claim to fame was, I'm the former Republican governor that you can trust because I've been there and I've done it. But forget that all my policies are what's causing the problems now, 10 years later. Right.
So how's that lawsuit going right now then?
So I had to make a decision on whether to continue it or not. So I think I reached the end of pursuing that lawsuit. The judge basically agreed with with a technical deficiency in the lawsuit, and I'm doing it as a layman, right? I'm self-represented there, so I had to either invest more of my own time to do it, and then I realized, you know what, there are other lawsuits that are going to accomplish the same goal. So I don't have to actually do that anymore. I've already embarrassed everybody into getting involved, in other words. So my goal is complete. Okay.
So you got the ball rolling.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good. All right. So let's shift gears and let's talk about your campaign. So you ran as governor, and I'm going to put the numbers up on here. And again, folks, this is not to embarrass anybody. We need to have a frank conversation so that in the future, when somebody runs or when people want to support somebody that is running, we all have a good idea of where we fit in. Like, how do we do this so that 1% becomes 3%, 3% becomes 6%, so on and so forth. And eventually we take over the entire United States and leave people alone, right? That is the ultimate goal, Okay. But we got a long way to go. So baby steps. So let's pull that up real quick. Bring that out. All right. Look, it's going to have to be zoomed in just a wee bit here. So let's get that. How does that look? We could do a little better, I think. And let's see here. And let's try that. I think that works out well. Okay. So here we are. We see that obviously Ron DeSantis won. We got Charlie Crist, who you mentioned a moment ago. Then we got Carmen Gimenez, who got 0.4%, and Hector Roos, yourself, who got 0.2%. So let's start with asking the most obvious question. What was your percentage goal, or did you have a numerical goal?
So the going back to before I filed, the reason why we wanted a candidate, or not, the reason why there should have been a candidate, was to gauge where we are at in support of our banner, right? Mm-hmm. So our comparative net metric was 6 years ago with the last Libertarian Party candidate for governor, which is about 100,000. So obviously we fell short. Mm-hmm. And something I said in my speech on election night was really that voters were looking for the strongest protest vote as possible, and they saw a career politician, Republican, who had essentially raised taxes on them, supported gun control, led to his office's screw-ups led to the deadliest hurricane the response was the deadliest response to a hurricane in modern Florida history. I could go on and on, but they accepted him as the protest because that's how bad DC was. It was a nationalized election, and with the idea being these DC so out of control that we want to send a clear message. And Charlie Crist was the DC preferred candidate, of course. But again, that lessons learned, right? You have to see where were we deficient. We were deficient as the party of and by the way, if you compare to the other statewide candidate we had on the ballot, which was Dennis Misagoy, I'm not doing that bad. But again, it's all relative. It's all relative. What does it actually say? It says, by the way, the Libertarian candidate in the last statewide Libertarian candidate was pulling anywhere from 1% to 3%. So to get to this amount, just indicates both. Well, I mean, it does, to their credit, by the way. All the other Libertarian candidates, whether it was Adrian Wiley or Alex Snicker or so forth, they actually had campaigned sometime, made time well over a year to campaign, right? And they had their different platforms and they focused on different geographical areas, and their message was different, right? For lack of a better way of saying this, a third of voters in the state of Florida are Hispanic or of Hispanic descendancy, like myself. So it's I'm not necessarily preaching to the same choir as they were,
right?
In that sense.
Yeah, and I pulled this up just so people can see. If you're watching now and you're like, hey, the Florida's numbers are really low. They are low, and look, this is not we're not beating up on Hector here.
Oh no,
we have to be honest with ourselves, right? And the last time we ran somebody was 2014, right?
Right. So
and like you said, he started like a year prior. No, I think it was like more than a year.
No, Adrian Wiley started like 2 years prior.
So it was quite a while.
He was offered in the actual debate. He was actually allowed to participate in the actual debates.
Right. So I here's what I want to say to people, because I supported you. Okay. And I have no regrets having supported you. And I know there was a lot of question about whether or not people should even, whether the Libertarian Party should run. A lot of it was because there was a lot of love for Ron DeSantis. But to be honest with you, when you look at these numbers, I think the perspective that we get from hearing about the love that people have for DeSantis is a little bit more inflated than what the numbers here show, because Charlie Crist got 40% of the vote. That's not enough to win. I mean, it's 20 percentage points behind, but there's a lot of vote that did not go to DeSantis. It's not like he got 70% or something like that, which is kind of the feeling that you would get if you had been listening to all the people that talk about how well loved he is and how well liked he is. But I think it was a bit overinflated. But here's the reason that I supported you. I was like, look, we haven't ran anybody since 2016, like 7 years. Well, I guess back at that time, it would have been more like 6 years. And I was like, we need to get in the habit of running people. And I think you said something earlier that kind of struck my mind. It was, hey, what's the baseline, right? Like, we need to establish a baseline. Our baseline cannot be 6 years ago. It needs to be last election. Well, now we have a baseline to work from. And hopefully from this retrospective, we will have some idea of how we can take that 0.2% and make it 1%, 3%, whatever the case may be, and get back to where we had that 2014. So we know one thing is running earlier. So let's, and that's generally a pretty obvious one. I don't think we need to really spend time on that. So let me just ask you a couple quick questions here. Well, first of all, what was the biggest challenge of your campaign, other than time? Rather than time,
right? Actually, it was interesting. It was harder to put together a willing team of participants than I thought it would be, because because of the sentiment that there shouldn't have been a Libertarian running in the first place. I was going into let's just say there was mixed expectations of what a Libertarian candidate should do, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they do run. So there's an expectation that with enough time you can run a competitive campaign. In other words, be more active and hit all the points and speak on a purely ideological message. And then there was this idea of simply a candidate that is a show candidate, right? Basically, that's on the ballot itself. It's just a placeholder or mm-hmm. what they call, forget the term now. and then there was what I did, which was
Paper candidate.
Paper candidate. Thank you. Then there's what I did, which was, hey, I'm going to take the actual current events that nobody's paying attention to, and I'm going to speak truth to power, right? So and I was not my form of campaigning was not appreciated because there was a sentiment that, hey, you have to. This is the most powerful governor in Florida history. Don't stop stepping on his tail. In other words,
Right.
But the reality is that we and Florida's still dealing with this. We have a fundamental cost of living crisis in the state of Florida, created by regulations, created by government intervention. We had essentially a takeover of the insurance industry, particularly home insurance industry in the state of Florida. Just absolute takeover because the for-profit private sector was walking out. They did walk out. They totally walked out of the entire Florida market, and the state would not let them go. Instead, they passed basically an emergency bailout. It says if you still want to operate business in Florida ever, you have to accept this money and take on all these policies, and we'll underrate it. That is a absolute takeover or nationalization of home insurance in Florida. And I can go on. The reality is that there's been nothing learned about this government in terms of how to actually allow people just to figure it out for themselves. No, there's heavy-handed, heavy interventionist policies in the state of Florida just simply made things worse. And nobody's going to say anything about it. No, come on. I didn't have the I didn't have the courage to just sit there and be a paper candidate. And because it's a different style and I didn't have the audacity to say that I could win, but I definitely could make noise. And that was I certainly accomplished that. I do want to, there's a bit of more of a buzzsaw in regards to the internal politics in the party about, we could have gone the way of Arizona, and somewhat it was, the reaction in Florida was such that, of course, in Arizona, the governor's race over there went the way it did, even though we had a much bigger stake in it, right? You had a candidate over there that's had time in that state, that had run before, that was showing.
Oh, you mean the Senate candidate?
No, the U.S. Senate candidate.
Senate candidate.
Yeah, actually, there was a governor candidate over there, and similarly to Florida, he was encouraged to not run, and he nodded his head and said, "Okay, I won't run." But that actually did happen. That practically happened in Florida too. So we couldn't recruit a candidate because people were discouraged to running itself, which is sad because this is the first election after COVID,
right? And
that to have no political response from the LP is just as disastrous as no response during the crisis too.
Right. Well, I think this kind of points out like the need for a show like this and other things that keep that momentum going, right? Because the next candidate for governor of any state, but we'll talk about Florida here, needs to start they need to start preparing now if they're thinking about running for governor, whoever that might be. Or the party needs to start thinking, all right, how are we going to support that candidate when they come out? Maybe they haven't quite decided yet. Maybe they're not going to decide for another year, right? And that's fine. But what we need to do is we need to be prepared to support the candidate. And we also, I think that it needs to be the flip side rather than, why are we running somebody? It should be more like, why aren't we running somebody? Right? The expectation should simply be that we run candidates. End of story. But you can't have that expectation that somebody's going to run without an equal expectation that we are going to have the necessary resources to support that candidate. And I get it. We're a small party and there's going to be a limited resources available comparatively. But the reality is we should compare ourselves to ourselves. We should look and say, how much did Hector Roos raise when he was running? Okay, well, we want to raise more than that next time, or we want to have more than that already ready. Maybe we need to create 900 packs across the state that's run by one person, just like the Republicans and the Democrats do, right? Like maybe we need to start doing some of these other things that allow us to have the necessary resources. So, okay, so getting volunteers, and it was, now you think that mostly the volunteer issue was one of hesitancy because of who the governor was.
Sure. I mean, but there's you do have an active block. Let's see, the Libertarian Party is very special, so people feel like they have
We're
a
special,
need,
all right.
but you know what? It's true in any party, but but it's such much louder in the Libertarian Party because it's smaller. That people are going to let me think of a term for this without using foul language. Things are going to be resistant to anyone trying to accomplish anything, frankly.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's if that's what is it, a bug or a feature.
Right.
But in other words, because there's just opposition for everything. Oh, you're doing this, I'm going to oppose you. Oh, we're going to have an anti-war rally. We're going to oppose you just because we believe a bunch of nonsense. And at the reality is that actually the point of running any candidate in this past cycle, when we really weren't ready to run a competitive pan state campaign, in other words, was to gauge where is our support level, not just the vote total, but like how easy would it be to actually run somebody, and that people would just say, I'll support the Libertarian, and I will help, and I will do what needs to be done. And I was more amazed about how resistant people were about it, and I'm not sure so that really was that plays into it. In retrospect, because that's really what we're here. The party can simply do more, and I think it can and it will, but we also need to be realistic and say, where are we at? As a party fundamentally, are we running candidates? Because if we run candidates, then are you going to support that candidate? Right. Right. We could do more like what Alabama did. Alabama decided to run, I don't know, 50, 60 candidates.
Right. They ran a bunch.
They basically ran so many
64
around the entire state and statewide that they were able to effectively use a run on a slate, right? Everyone supported each other, booing each other's support. They didn't have that much resources, but they sure did have energy, right? And it's not surprising that some of the candidates got 20% statewide, right? Right. And that's the point, right? Those are numbers that you can grow from when you don't have a lot of resources. Right. And that's effective. Now, on our end, I want to point out something very, very important, though. The metric of votes does matter. And especially running Libertarian candidates in big states, especially matters. Because I want to point out, I shared a link to you, DL, about what the gubernatorial elections look like in New Hampshire, and compare it to my vote totals, and compared to the amount of noise that a gubernatorial election in any big state would have. And my metrics would blow away any of those small states, any of them, any of the smaller states, or as Vice Chair Joshua Lavka would say of the state party, the lesser states. So just to point out that if you see you have two candidates who are there running as Libertarians who are getting, less than 7,000 votes in total, right? And they had been running for years, right? Just to point it out. So those numbers do truly reflect what they have over there as well, right? Sununu was actually in the election going, we should abolish the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire. That was one of his last claims in the month before the election, right over there.
Now, in fairness to the New Hampshire folk, they are a bit of a special breed because they have the Free State Project there, and they make some. They make their own unique noise over there. We'll put it that way. Good folks, definitely. Don't get me wrong. No shade to them whatsoever, but they are definitely unique in their own sense. They're a very tight knit group, and honestly, I kind of commend them for that. I wish that you would see more states that were tight knit. Now, I think Florida does pretty well. I think that from what I could see online, the majority of libertarians or people who are identifying as libertarians who were criticizing you were not really from Florida. I don't think I can recall anybody that I know for sure who was from Florida that was criticizing you because they preferred DeSantis, or didn't think that we should be running against DeSantis or what have you. It seems like everybody that was making that kind of noise was either from another state who had it worse, or maybe recently moved to Florida from one of those blue states where it was worse. That's my observation. I'm sure there was probably a few out there, but it just seemed to me like, for the most part, you got decent. I mean, it wasn't exciting. I mean, we have 30,000 libertarians roughly, I think, in the state of Florida. And unfortunately, you didn't get 30,000 votes, but you got almost 20,000. So there's that. All right. So let's move on to the next question here. What was the biggest success of your campaign?
Just the ability to make noise. I think also, remember, if the campaign's original core goal was to be a diagnostic, where are we as a party in Florida, and I think we were wildly successful in that sense, right? What you say is what is the just on the noise front too, certainly getting media attention, being able to reach out to different activist community. What are the issues that we really should be focusing on in Florida? That's a lot of feedback. Mm-hmm. Now, I will point out though that what you just said about basically opposition outside of the state to the candidacy. I mean, there was opposition inside the state, but the point is that it's interesting to see how triggered people who say that they are for supporting a new Libertarian Party, one that actually is making the Libertarian Party libertarian again, but the noise is coming from the loudest critics possible in the movement, and right. I found that very interesting because ultimately it's you find it from a right wing perspective, and you even find it from a leftist perspective, that you have donors who simply who reject the notion that you should be even poking the bear of DeSantis. And on the other side, in other words, you should just leave it up for the Democrats to be the opposition party, literally, right? And you guys should just be a protest party. And when there is nothing else out there, and on the right wing side, it's like you should support the Republican at every time, or else you're going to make things much worse, right? I will point out that I'm a believer that there is that if you are going to support a Republican. Not just over a Libertarian, but generally speaking, the idea is support. So if you support them, they go into office and then they turn into the worst type of totalitarian fascist. Oops, like what happened in 2020. Oops. Right. Then you actually have no credibility to oppose them when they actually are passing that same legislation, that same policy. Right. And in fact, the revisionism out there that existed. DeSantis never locked down Florida. Our education policies are really are good or bad on either for different reasons, and so forth. I'm like, or even our tax policies are very favorable to people who live in Florida compared to other states. I mean, there is a lot of false equivalency going on in Florida as well, and people simply or with people describing Florida. It's very interesting to see how people get their information and how they regurgitate simply poor information. Right. So the biggest claim that I always said, and what triggered people the most was me actually just saying, Ron DeSantis locked down Florida. Ron DeSantis kept Florida in a state of emergency as long as practically as long as California, and right. Kids and it would blow your mind the type of pushback. I would get to that. DeSantis. Right. The point is that without having to go over the plethora of things that people and the so-called libertarians ended up defending, was astounding. So what does that mean? So that means that we need to actually have our own information, why I'm here, right? We need to have right. Good information that's put out that can be debated, that can be even just talked about brief. In any case, and if everyone here that's listening to you was at least on the state party Discord channel, for instance, they would at least get a nice feed of information that of like news bulletins of what's actually happening in the state of Florida that people could have access to within our own party. We need to have that, because otherwise they're literally left with a Fox News version of what libertarianism is. And of course, that literally is a pro-war, pro-government intervention, pro-mass murder kind of approach to government and an approach to libertarianism, frankly.
Right.
Sometimes I'm actually, if I say the beginning question was, what's the number one takeaway, the number one success that we had of that? It really is figuring out how badly we need this, right?
Right.
And how terrifying it would be to just leave it like that otherwise.
Right. Gotcha. All right. So we need to wrap this up and get onto that bill review. So let me ask you, do you have any plans to run again? Or are we going to see Hector Roos come back for another gubernatorial run?
There is a conversation about that.
Okay.
I would entertain it if there's nobody else again that would want to do it, because again they're discouraged. But more importantly, there's an ongoing conversation right now within Republican world about whether they should repeal the resign to run law that would allow Ron DeSantis to run for office and not have to resign as governor, and trigger another special election that would run it in 2024. Right. So our friends at, let's just say, the enemy or enemy is our friend. So not to call Trump supporters or the Trump campaign or Donald Trump himself an enemy, but they are obviously a check internally on what on too much power being gathered by this governor. And so that's really where we're at. It's really, how scared are they of Donald Trump to avoid another special election in Florida next year.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Hector, it was great having you on again. We need to get onto that bill review. So what's going to happen here, since you got in a little bit late, we didn't get to chat right before the show. We're going to jump off here. I will not be able to talk to you backstage. It's just not how this system works very well. But I will point out that one of our commenters did want to say, I hope Hector Roos can make it to the Gold Standard Rally this Saturday. She wants to finally meet you in person. So you at least got one fan out there, at least, so you may have a lot of haters, but you got one fan. So you got that going for you. I don't know if you can make it.
A shout out to Pastor Tub Rowerball, that's running for Duval County or Jacksonville City Council over there. And I saw him post a comment there. He was my running mate. Yep. He's a great guy. I love all you guys in Duval County.
It's great. But we understand that you're also in Miami, so making the trip up here is a bit tough. So, but if we see you, we do. I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you answer here live on my syndicated show there, D, in the comments, talking about, I wish there was a show that was libertarian friendly. It's like right here, like we're on it. Just kidding. I tease. But thank you for Hector for being on. And so let's go ahead, everybody. And we're going to dive into a bill review. I do want to point out really quickly, I'm going to bump you off here real quick, Hector. I want to point out real quick, folks, that the bill review that I have coming up is a pre-recorded one. It is one that I did a while back, and that's because things are heating up here in Jacksonville, and they're keeping me busy. Between the three candidates trying to plan an event that we've got, the commercial that you saw at the very beginning of the show, the event that we've got coming up on the 25th at Veterans United. If you happen to be here in Jacksonville, please come out, meet all three candidates. That is from 6 to 9 p.m. at Veterans United. We're also going to have Chase Oliver, who was the Senate candidate that caused the runoff up in Georgia. And then we're also going to bring in Larry Sharp, who ran for the governor race in New York. He's got a great story to tell. So we're going to have some amazing guests. We're going to have very amazing candidates come out. It's only $20. But for now, let's go ahead and get on to a bill review.
But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Be aware that last night at City Council meeting, the members voted in favor of an ordinance to ban panhandling. Panhandling, most often the begging for money at intersections, is rather annoying. However, the Libertarian Party of Duval County opposes this ordinance, and it's more than just a dislike for government. But first, let's take a quick summary from News4Jack's clip, and then we'll go ahead and get into it.
Get a ticket or even be arrested for giving money to somebody on the side of the road or in an intersection panhandling.
So last night, the city council passed a bill designed to crack down on panhandling to make the roads safer. News for Jax reporter Ashley Harding's joining us now live. And Ashley, there will be a grace period.
Yes, Jen and Bruce, it is going to be a 30-day grace period, and JSO says that it's going to be out in the community educating people about this new change. Now, to put this change in simplest terms, people would not be allowed to stand in medians or the roadways for extended periods of time and solicit money, but it also applies to the person inside the car. They would not be allowed to engage either. The final vote last night was 16-3, an overwhelming majority of city council leaders signing off in favor of cracking down on panhandling in roadways and medians. Following the 30-day grace period, the bill calls for penalties that include up to a $100 fine for a first offense. On a second violation, the offender would get a warning and possibly a trespassing notice. Repeat offenders may be arrested for up to 10 days.
I don't believe in arresting people. I think, I supported this because it addressed a lot of the safety issues. But I would tell you, my folks don't have $100, to get out. So I'm really depending on, public safety to kind of help get the word out. We got to do a really good job at marketing.
Several council members echoed those thoughts about public safety. After it passed, Councilman Kevin Carrico, who introduced it, released a statement to further explain it, saying the bill does not outlaw the act of panhandling in the city. It makes any physical interaction, commercial use, or occupancy of public rights of ways, medians, and roadways illegal in our most heavily traveled roadways. Jacksonville recently ranked 6th in the nation for pedestrian injuries and fatalities. We can neither do something about it or just ignore the issue. The bill does allow an exception for charities as long as they get a permit first.
Having people walking around your car, distracting people at intersections, walking around with pets, walking around with children at busy intersections, and you want to talk about public safety? Man, I can't think of something more dangerous than cars running through there.
All right. So, sounds great, right? I mean, isn't it city council's job to protect citizens? We'd like to think they'd have the, we'd like to think they would operate in facts, though, before they would even attempt to do so. The ordinance that they voted on, 2022, which was last year, 574, it lists a bunch of whereas clauses at the very beginning. Now, if you're unfamiliar with a whereas clause, there's simply a series of stated facts that support whatever legislation that is going to follow. Think of it like saying, because my spouse works until 6 p.m., and because the drive home takes at least 30 minutes, and because I want my spouse to enjoy a warm meal after a hard day at work, that would be the whereas clause. And then it would go on to say something like, therefore, I will not start dinner until 6:15. So basically, the whereas clause just kind of gives some information, some background as to why whatever that is being proposed in the legislation is being proposed. The 7 whereas clauses list several that appear to support an ordinance against panhandling, but they really don't. Let's take a look at one. All right. So whereas in a study dated September 21st, the Florida Department of Transportation evaluated Florida pedestrian and bicycle safety strategies to combat the comparatively high percentage. Florida ranks the 2nd highest ranked state in the country for vehicle pedestrian deaths and recommended enhanced, quote, legislation, regulations, policies, and programs to support the overall goal of eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes. All right, so that's what one of the whereas clauses says. However, if we look at the document, so we look at that September 2021 Florida Department of Transportation document, and guess what? Panhandling isn't even mentioned in the document. In fact, I pulled up the document, Florida Pedestrian and Bicycle Strategic Safety Plan, September 2021. I believe this is the exact same one that the whereas clauses were mentioning. So if we go on over to page 24, we find something very interesting. So we see that it says dispelling crash myths. So myth number 1, very first one listed. Crashes involving people walking and biking usually occur at intersections. However, it says the fact is that the majority of pedestrian crashes are reported to occur away from intersections. And if we look down here at the nice little graphic that they have provided, we see that pedestrians make up 26% of all accidents, not fatalities, all accidents at intersections. What we could not find was any specific data regarding what percentage of that 26% were panhandling versus something else like simply walking or crossing the street. Now, it is true that Duval ranks high compared to other cities, as shown here on page 22. And we can see that we are the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one down, ranking relatively high above all of these other cities. But again, we're evaluating the claim of safety. And so far, this bill does not identify what percentage of accidents actually involve the act of panhandling. But there's more reason to oppose this bill. As City Council member Pittman, in the video clip that we just saw, said, people don't have $100. The most likely reason that they're begging at an intersection is because they don't have money or very little money. In other words, we're going to find people $100 who already don't have money. Furthermore, this bill outlines penalties based on incremental punishment. Now, you saw that in the video clip where they said, hey, on the first offense, you'll have this. On the second offense, you'll have this. And so you see that for the first offense, an offender is given an educational notice from JSO. On the second offense, they will receive an official warning and they may be trespassed. And then the third offense, a civil citation, think of this like receiving a traffic ticket instead of a warning, like on the second offense. And then finally, the fourth violation is subject to being arrested. The ordinance is presented as for safety to cut down on pedestrian vehicle accidents. Yet only 26% of all pedestrian accidents even occur at intersections. It's unknown what number are even related to panhandling. And finally, the bill to ensure safety of citizens takes a very gradual approach. You get an educational warning, then you get an official warning, then you may get a citation, then you get arrested. Safety doesn't seem to be a very big priority here, does it? But we're not done yet. Remember in the News for Jax clip where they said the driver may be cited? That's where the news reporter was sitting in the car holding some dollar bills. Oh yeah. If someone is asking for money and I roll down my window and I give them a $5 bill, I may be cited as well. In other words, the city of Jacksonville has just made it a crime for one consenting adult to ask and receive money from another consenting adult, just because the transaction is occurring at an intersection. The Libertarian Party firmly supports the idea of two consenting adults engaging in consenting behavior, such as asking for and giving money. Now, it may not be ideal when you're waiting in traffic for another person that's driving to hand someone money, but that is a transaction between two consenting adults, and government simply has no place in preventing it. Now, some people have cited aggressive panhandling as a problem, banging on windows, grabbing door handles, and so forth. We do oppose that behavior. That's aggression. And we support law enforcement getting involved anytime one person is aggressing at another. But we have to draw the line with ordinances that are not really rooted in fact, because when they are not, it's likely that none of the problems that they're trying to solve will be solved. If you want to solve the real problem of pedestrian and cycling accidents, then identify when and where they occur and have an honest conversation about what can be done. More than likely, the issue is not really a criminal one, but one where the situation creates a conflict. For instance, when I first moved to Jacksonville, I happened to cycle down Bay Meadows between Southside and Phillips Highway once. Any accident that might have occurred would likely not have been a criminal in nature, but it would have been two people trying to get from point A to point B and finding that the situation, for whatever reason, was unsuitable to fit both in that moment. In the particular example I cite, down Bay Meadows between Southside and Phillips Highway, you know that there is absolutely no place for a cyclist. This was a lesson that I learned and why it's only happened once. If you want to solve the issue of panhandling, then you need to address the larger problem, and that's the need for money. This ordinance does nothing to change the very reason that people are begging at intersections. We'd be better off finding local organizations that seek to help the very people those very people and donating to them. Much better than criminalizing what is otherwise or should otherwise be considered consenting adult behavior. If you have some organizations in town that you believe work with beggars, drop them in the comments. We need to start spreading the word. This is simply not a good bill because it doesn't really address the issue of safety, nor does it address the root cause. With that said, please be safe and guard your liberty. Have a great one.